There we go. Okay.
Steve Donnell, Vermont AG Agriculture, Food and Markets. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. What I will be talking about today is the recommended best management practices proposed by the Secretary based on the recommendations of the Agricultural Innovation Board. This is a requirement, or I'm not sure what the correct term is, but it's in Act 145 that the Secretary shall propose best management practices for the use of neonicotinoid treated seeds based on the recommendations of the Agricultural Innovation Board. And so that's what we provided as a report on March 1st to the House Ag Committee and the Senate Ag Committee. And so that's what I'm going to go over today. Did that answer your question initially about the genesis of this?
Yeah, there's just the piece I was thinking of was that within a certain time period, the legislature can respond, and absent some sort of response, they will take effect.
Well, no, I don't think that's the way it would go. This would have to be adopted by rule. So we'd have to go through the entire rulemaking process, which would start with I guess a notice that we were about to enter rulemaking. It would go to the interagency legislative committee, and then it will go to the legislative review committee.
Okay.
So there will be lots of opportunity to discuss this. This is, if anything, this is a starting point. And as we get through it, I think you'll see too, this is really, to me, this is the starting point of a process that's going to go on for a while. I don't think these are anywhere near any kind of in a form that would be adopted by rule. Okay, I think we have a long way to go. A lot of opportunity for input and modification. And probably maybe the place to start would be on page 2, where we talk about the purpose, 1.03, section 1.0. And also, I need to apologize right up front. We have a typo or a scrivener's error, what do you want to call it, where we have 2 section 3s.
Oh.
So,
I want to see that.
yeah. So the severability section should be section 4, obviously. Yeah. Anyway, section 3 is the bulk of the BMPs.
Representative O'Brien, question.
Steve, just to be clear, are neonics specifically mentioned, or is it more treated article seeds in the bigger sense? Because some have
Yes.
with herbicides and maybe in the future.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought, I was going to mention that. So these are written to apply to all insecticide treated seeds, not just neonics, because, as we anticipate, there'll be other insecticides that would be used on these seeds.
Representative Rice.
There was last year, maybe previously, there were
Yes.
non-neonic treated seed guidelines released, right?
Well, there were not. Actually, what we did, so there was a requirement in February to propose BMPs for non-neonicotinoid treated seeds. And the AIB decided, based on the fact that we were going to be providing BMPs for neonicotinoid treated seeds, to just combine them all in,
Okay.
rather than have to go through 2 different.
I guess there was a report.
Yeah, it was, the report was provided, and the report said, we're going to wait and do it with the neonicotinoid seeds. So that's what this is. So it combined both of them into, this is intended to deal with all insecticide treated seed, not just neonicotinoid treated seeds. So did that answer your question, Representative?
Yes,
Okay.
but it doesn't get into, say, foliar application.
Oh, no.
Okay.
No, I will say though, and this may be, getting ahead of it, with the bill as it was passed by the House, it added BMPs for neonicotinoid insecticides too. So that's another wrinkle and another reason to consider this is just the start of a process, because obviously we're going to go back and, reconsider all that.
Just a clarification of terminology. You said all insecticides. Does that include all pesticides, meaning herbicides?
No.
So herbicides are not part of this.
Well, you typically wouldn't put a herbicide on the seed anyway.
That's not what we took testimony on.
Well, if you put a herbicide on the seed.
I'm sorry, not fungicide.
Fungicide, right. It does not include fungicide.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's just insecticide treated seeds. Yeah. So anyway, so 1.03 is the purpose. And the wording here is pretty deliberate, or very deliberate. It says the following BMPs are established for appropriate use of insecticide-treated article seeds. These practices are recommended best practices to be used whenever reasonable and practical. Additional or modified BMPs may be adopted as Vermont-based research evolves and provides more guidance. So this is specifically written to support the recommendations of the Agricultural Innovation Board, which was to do research on the impacts of the use of neonicotinoid treated seeds in Vermont. And it's more specifically to look at the issue of the dust that's generated through the use of the seed. So there was some research, a small amount of research done by UVM last year where they looked at different seed lubricants and different methods of planting seed, but it was not enough to make any conclusions about what kind of dust is generated or the impacts of dust. There's been a lot of research done on that in other areas, but what the AIB, the information provided to the AIB was that since that research was done, seed coatings have improved to reduce the dust that's generated. Particularly, they apply a polymer coating on them now to reduce the dust. And so the idea is we're going to, using the current seed coatings, see what the dust issues are and how to manage those dust issues. Canada took the step a number of years ago to prohibit the use of talc or graphite. So when there's different kinds of seed planters, and we really need to get UVM in here to walk you through all the different, specifics of the seed planters and the mechanics and everything. But in general, some types of seed planters use an additive that is put into the planter box to allow the seed to be picked up by the planter and planted individually, because you don't want to have two seeds going into a spot. You want one individual seed and you want uniformity. And it's a very complicated subject. There's a lot of different things to consider in that. There's different kinds, there's vacuum planters, there's positive pressure vacuum planters, there's negative pressure vacuum planters, there's mechanical planters. They all have different characteristics. One of the things we need to find out is what are the characteristics of the planters used by growers in Vermont, because there's a range, and what would be an appropriate measure for one may not be an appropriate measure for another. And so that's part of the issue of trying to find out what we need to do before we, regulate and say, you got to do X, Y, or Z, because that may be appropriate for one type of planter, but not be good for another type of planter. So we have to figure all that out. And again, I'm sorry I'm hopping around here a little bit, but we are engaged with UVM in conducting research. We're having a meeting. We've got some proposals from them we're already working through, and we have some meetings coming up, and we will be sponsoring, cooperating with them on research in all the areas that the AIB recommended. So that's going forward. And, we'll certainly come back and report everything that's going on and what we're finding and what we're learning and all that. So,
Representative O'Brien?
Steve, I'm just wondering how these sort of BMP research goes forward, and that's like what you're talking about. You take the seed as it is now, and we have a dust problem. So then we're talking very mechanically, say, about how it goes into the earth. But does the AIB step back also and say, like, their recognized toxicity levels here with neonics? So, for example, you might recommend that however much neonic is coated on the seed, we could get away with, say, using half of that going forward if we did a certain amount of research.
Yeah, I don't think that's the direction where we're going. It's more along the lines of, if you have say you have a negative air pressure planter, what's the correct way to use it? So one of the things we looked at early on, and some other people looked at early on, were there could be, so with a air pressure, with a sprayer that's using air pressure, they're either pulling air in and exhausting it, or they're generating, they're manipulating air in the field, and as a result of manipulating that air, they're moving dust around, right? So one of the thoughts was, well, we can direct the dust to the ground, and then you don't have to worry about the dust off. But turns out that's not a good idea either, because when you direct the dust to the ground, you could increase the level that's on the soil, and then that could have negative effects on some of the ground dwelling, beneficial insects, et cetera. So there are a lot of issues there. And the information is so preliminary right now. It was what the conclusion the AIB came to was, we can't say what you can do. We need to find out. The same thing with talc and graphite. If you just say you can't use talc and graphite, what does that do? That might even be a negative. You might increase the abrasion on the seeds and you end up with more dust. So we have to do the research, find out what's going on, and then use that to make the recommendations or requirements that planters need to follow. So, yeah.
But it seems like in some ways BMPs and IPM don't really overlap in that way. I mean, they're not.
Well, we're dealing with one specific issue, which is the dust,
Uh-huh.
and this set of BMPs. Okay, so the IPM thing is a whole different element of it. But part of it is, one of the recommendations for the AIB was, education and information to growers so they can decide what to do. And that's already started. UVM did the series of webinars last year on the management of corn pests and neonicotinoid seeds, and there'll be others coming. But that goes toward how to manage the pest and, how to do it in a way that has the least impact, so.
Steve, you used a word about 10 minutes ago called polymer.
Yes,
It's a coater.
right.
And I apologize for not knowing what polymer is.
Polymer is just a long chain molecule. It's just a large molecule. Plastics are polymers. Cellulose is a polymer. There's just a long molecule. So they have materials that they apply to the seed after it's been treated to reduce the dust that comes off when the seed's
So I got that.
right.
And as a society, we're struggling with all the PFAS.
Right. Right.
And is there an equation between polymer and PFAS or?
That's one of the things we looked into, and the information we have right now is they're not PFAS, that the polymers are not PFAS. We can get that information to you if you'd like, but that's one question we asked right off the bat is, are the polymers PFAS? Would that be good?
Representative Rice?
Yeah, so Steve, can you help me understand why Vermont specific research is important specifically for the dust and the planter piece? I mean, I understand
Yeah.
around sort of planting medium and soils and practices, but
Well, the answer is that the work that was done by the Corn Dust Research Consortium, that was done like 10 years ago.
okay, so it's more just
It's more
Contemporary
current. Yeah,
research,
yeah,
then.
it's contemporary. Right. Yeah.
Representative Tumblin?
Yeah, so piggyback on Representative Lipsky's point. So whether or not it is a PFAS chain molecule,
Mhm.
polymers are also considered a pollutant, are they not?
It depends on the polymer. Yeah, I mean, it's like cellulose is a polymer.
Very good.
So polymer just means long molecule, that's all.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, that'll be one of the elements of research is identify we have some of the safety data sheets for some of the materials, but as you heard, the seed industry is pretty diverse and there are a lot of players and everybody does their own thing.
Yeah.
So we have to really, nail that down. But the information we have so far is that they're not PFAS.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, I think we can proceed.
Okay, so anyway, that's 1.03. So I'm not going to go through the definitions. If anyone has a question, we can talk about it. Section 3 on page 3 is the set of at this point, recommended best management practices, again, to be, researched and validated and refined as we go forward. And these are pretty much just common sense things, but, and I'll say this too, I think that, when it comes to best management practices and ways for growers to use these seeds, the biggest impact we're going to have is through research, or excuse me, is through education and training. There's always regulation out there, but my experience is regulation isn't anywhere near as effective as education. Once you explain, and once the folks you're educating have understand and believe in what you're trying to do, then that's where you get your compliance, as opposed to saying you got to do X, Y, and Z, and then having somebody out there watching you. So anyway, that's just a general thing. But anyway, so the whole idea of these best management practices.
Representative Pearl.
I just was curious about, so currently the certification that an applicator has to have for pesticides
Right.
does not encompass treated seeds because they're not considered a pesticide because
Right.
they're treated. Do
Right.
you think, has there been any talk about including?
That's a potential,
in
yes.
that?
Yeah, and that's actually a potential at the national level.
Okay.
EPA has published what they call an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking, selecting, getting information on specifically on that topic about whether or not, so right now, when a seed is treated with a pesticide, the pesticide has to be labeled for that use. And then there's a whole set of directions on how to use it. In Vermont, to use those materials, you have to be certified. So we actually have one certified seed treater in the state who's taken the test and gotten the certification, and potentially could be more. But at the national level, once the seed is treated, then it's not a regulated article anymore. And back up a second, when a seed is treated, the information about the insecticide use and the information that's on the label, all the warnings and all the directions for use have to be put on the seed tag too. So if you look at a seed tag for a treated article seed, you'll see a long document that's repeated but those are not enforceable directions because it's the seed, not the insecticide. So one of the questions EPA asked in their proposed rulemaking was whether or not those directions should be enforceable. So that's sort of out there at the federal level. So, and again, that I think we have to see where we end up with what we're doing as to whether that's the appropriate thing to do. It's unclear to me, put it that way. Because anytime you establish a regulation, then that creates another something else you got to deal with. And
Yeah, I just wondered if it would be beneficial for it to be a applicator and handling license, or certification rather, so that we're collecting.
Yes, sir. The education on how to use it properly is the most important thing, I think.
Yeah.
And that's what we need. And that's what, again, the AIB's recommendation is. Yeah. Okay.
Representative O'Brien.
Just following up on Representative Pearl and also referencing something that came up in interrogation with Steve. Are a certain percentage of our vegetable or flower seeds, including our sweet corn, are they treated article seeds?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. One of the things that we're doing right now is collecting that information from the seed distributors. So we have a staff member who's working on that right now, identifying all the different seeds that are distributed in Vermont that are treated and what they're treated with. And it's a little complicated because again, there's so many different types of seeds and so many different distributors. And then there are sub-distributors. And so some distributors get the seed that's already treated and they repackage it and then they distribute it. So it gets pretty complicated, but we can come in and talk to you about that too at some point if you want. We're working on that right now.
So the burden is upon the government, not the seed providers, to register their product.
Well, the distributors have to be registered. So to distribute seed in Vermont, you have to be a registered distributor.
With the product.
The distributor has to be registered.
Right.
And then you have to report the amount you sell in, I think, tons. And then we have, I think, just starting last year, because of legislation, started asking, well, what did you treat it with? And so that's what we're going to right this minute
Mhm.
is, what did you treat it with? What seed did you distribute? And what was it treated with?
Oh, okay.
So that's what we're,
Not necessarily what did you treat it with, but what was it treated with, so that
yeah.
generally speaking, the
Right,
distributors.
right. We're trying to get a handle, as good a handle on that as we can. But yeah, there are vegetable seeds. You can go into a store and if you look at the seed package, you'll see that it's treated. So yeah, vegetable seeds are treated. Ornamental plants are treated. A lot of plant materials treated.
Rice.
Would you say it's more common in the case of vegetable seeds? Is it often fungicides that they're treated with, or is it both? Or
I've seen fungicides, I've seen neonicotinoids, I've seen other insecticides, I've seen, it's a large array of pesticides and non-pesticides too. There's another whole category of materials called biostimulants, which can be treated, they can be treated with that. And then sometimes they make claims that verge on being a pesticide, then you have to register. So it's, anyway, that's what we're looking at.
All right. Well,
But no, certainly welcome the questions. So section 3, just a general statement, a person using an insecticide treated garden will be familiar with label requirements. 3.02 label guidance. A person using an insecticide treated garden seed should follow directions and requirements on an insecticide treated garden seed bag label, including proper handling, storage, use, and disposal, recommended rate and depth of planting, hazard statements related to pollinators. And then and so I'll stop right there because that's just a general, so if an insecticide is used on the seed and it has a pollinator hazard statement on the pesticide, then that has to be repeated on the seed label. Section 3, this is really the meat of it. Dust and non-target exposure mitigation. A person using an insecticide treated garden seed should minimize dust generation and potential drift or other non-target exposure from the seed as follows. Avoid planting during windy conditions, which is defined as greater than 50 miles per hour, and when wind is blowing toward nearby surface water or flowering crops. Handle seed bags carefully during transport and loading to reduce abrasion and dust generation. Use dust-reducing seed lubricants and avoid using lubricants that increase dust due to abrasion. So that's a key research area. There are a couple of proprietary seed lubricants that can be used, which are supposed to reduce the dust. Those have to be, UVM started looking at those last year, but didn't get a lot of data. So that's one thing we need to really nail down. That might be a solution. Ensure the planter is calibrated and functions properly. Avoid or reduce releasing excess dust from a seed bag, including by loading planters at least 10 yards inside field borders. That's sort of common sense. It's a little more complicated in that for large growers, they don't actually use seed bags anymore. They use the big bags that actually get placed on top of the planter. So there's a lot of, things there. So, clean planting equipment without using compressed air. Obviously, if you use compressed air, you're going to create more dust. Clean planting equipment without contaminating surface water and pollinator attractive habitats. Dispose of excess rinse water from cleaning within the crop field and without causing surface ponding. Do not broadcast or plant or scatter seeds to soil surfaces. So the trade article seeds can't be broadcast, obviously increases exposure to birds. Ensure all planted seeds are thoroughly incorporated during planting and evaluate whether additional incorporation is necessary after initial planting to thoroughly cover any exposed seeds. Collect any seeds spilled during loading or planting and store them for subsequent planting in accordance with the section below. And dispose of any seeds spilled during loading and planting in accordance with section 3.07. So, any questions about that?
Would any of these, they all seem, as you said, fairly straightforward and common sense. Would there be anything here particular that a farmer is likely to say, that's going to be more work than I currently do? And
the only one
I really need to be convinced about that.
Yeah, the only one that comes to mind is using compressed air to clean the planter. I think that's probably it could be a common practice. And so we'll probably have some education to do along those lines. And
that's to clean the bin or.
Well, the whole apparatus. I mean, not sure I have the right terminology for it. That all the different parts that are up front and the parts back. They get a lot of dust on them. And it might be. I mean, if you're interested, we could arrange a visit during planting. I'm sure UVM would be glad to do that. They have a couple of research farms where they do a lot of this. We could, if you're interested, we could do that.
Interesting, is it?
Yeah, and when they were doing the research last year, they were able to get a hold of a couple of different kinds of planters, to try them out and see how they behaved with these issues. So we could do something like that. Any other questions on this section?
Like what? Soybeans need pollinators, they're flowers that need pollinators.
It's a little mixed. The information about that's a little mixed. Soybeans tend to be beneficial to pollinators because especially there's a lot of the varieties used are what they call indeterminate, which means they just keep flowering. They don't just flower once, they just keep flowering. And so they provide a lot of pollen and nectar to pollinators. And in areas, in certain states like Alabama and Mississippi, where they have a lot of soybeans, they have real high honey production because the bees can get out there. So so soybeans tend to be good for bees. But they don't, I think the research is mixed on whether you get a yield increase if you have managed pollinators on soybeans. I think I don't think I haven't seen, there might be some, but I haven't seen any research that shows that you need they're not like some other crops where, you want pollinators there. Cotton and soybeans tend to be ones that will do all right if they're not there, but if you have the bees there, the bees will do all right too. So. Anyway, so the next section is integrated pest management. And so this is, just some general language. A person using insecticide treated with article seed should implement IPM practices, including the following practices: learn which crop protection practices increase or reduce risk of insect pest damage. This is another area I think we really need to focus on with the Vermont research, because of the cropping systems and the practices, especially cover crops and manure. Those practices potentially can increase the risk of the corn seed maggot, along with the early planting dates. So that's an area that I know Heather's really interested in looking at, Heather Darby, UVM, and we're interested in also. And so that's, I think, where it could be a real fruitful area for defining what the highest risks are and what practices increase risk or reduce risk. So the next one is choose an appropriate rate of insecticide street treatment that can effectively manage target pests without over application. Again, that's going to be research based. And one thing I'll say too, just when I keep talking about Vermont based research, but Cornell is going to be doing a lot of this also. And we're Heather Darby is working with those folks. I've already reached out and I know my counterpart in New York pretty well, and we're on some committees together. So we're going to be meeting to figuring out what they're doing. So we should, we'll benefit from their efforts.
Right.
So I guess I don't understand how a person using an insecticide treated article seed could choose an appropriate rate of insecticide seed treatment that can manage pests without over application.
Right. I think that's going to boil down to what the research shows. For example, so when they go to buy the seed, so this is just sort of speculation, excuse me, but I think we can get to this spot where if we know that certain planting dates and crop practices like cover crop incorporation or manure spreading or whatever increases the risk of a pest like corn seed maggot, or for example, if the field has been in grass and it's been converted into, that you have a higher risk of wireworms. That in a situation like that, if you know that going in, you have because the whole problem with IPM with corn forage production and the way the seed markets work is you have to make the decisions in the fall for the spring. So you need some mechanism to evaluate the risk. We haven't had to do that because we've had the neonicotinoid treat seeds. So without those seeds, we're going to have to now evaluate the risk. We're going to have to figure out what the models are, what the information is about that risk. But to get back to your point, if you had a low risk based on everything we know, then you would lose a lower or no rate. But if you were at a high risk, then you'd want to use some control method because, as we all know, you can't, once it's in the field and the corn seed maggot shows up, you're just going to have to take the hit. So, that's where we need. And that's research that I know Cornell's doing right now.
Is that currently on the market? Does a farmer have a choice
Yes.
in terms of
Yes.
amount of application?
Yes.
And then, so this could be used both for that and also maybe, in the case of, we hear in Quebec, some of the, half using diamide treated, half
Yeah.
non-treated.
Right, exactly. Right. So the decision making, if you have the information and you trust it, then you can make the decisions up front about what to do. And that's where that would go. And there are, so the diamide, there's another material, spinosyn, I think, which may be a seed treatment too. That's another thing we need to look at. So, there's options out there, but we just need more information about how that'll actually work. And, we're going to spend time and effort here in Vermont to do that, but we're also going to, use Cornell's experience to get there and develop that, that approach. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So the last is part C is utilize multiple pest management methods to avoid or reduce risk. Again, that goes right back to what we're talking about. So again, it's develop that. 3.05, communication and continuous education. Any person using an insecticide treated article should provide at least 48 hours advance notice to all apiculturists who have an established apiary on the premises. Excuse me. A person using an insecticide treated article should attend reasonably available education and outreach programs. Again, that goes back to what the AIB was advocating. And one thing I should back up just a second to get back to the risk. The risk evaluation. One of the things that UVM wants to do, and I think it's a good idea, is they actually want to evaluate the population level of these pests, in the general area. So we actually monitor the pest to see. Like one of the research questions is, where, when does this fly start being a problem? When does the corn seed maggot? So if we can evaluate the population level, we may be able, there may be specific times, probably tied back to a climate model, so we could. And that happens right now with, I'm sorry to digress, but are you familiar with the way apple growers manage fungicide applications with their climate model? If you've heard testimony of that.
Tracks, right?
Well, what they do is they actually, it's just a computer climate model. And they actually, you get as localized weather information as you can. Some have their own weather stations. It gets plugged into this climate model and actually advises the grower when to apply fungicide because the conditions are right. And they've been able to reduce their fungicide application by about 50%
Wow.
by using the model, because it will say, instead of spraying on a schedule every 2 weeks, they'll say, yep, you better go out there and spray today, or yeah, you don't. And so that's what a lot of the growers are using now. UVM's Terry Bradshaw, big proponent of it. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about is, some knowledge-based risk evaluation method for farmers to decide what they need to. And part of that would be the population level, I think, of the pest.
App. An app, whatever.
It's WEWAS, the one I'm familiar with, is the acronym. WEWA.
Is it a machine or is it
It's
something?
a computer program.
It's a computer program.
It gets input from weather stations, and there may be some of their parameters, I'm not familiar with, you put in there. Yeah, but that's where pest management's going for a lot of agricultural stuff. You need to.
Representative O'Brien.
Steve, on the communication side, now that we know that a lot of home gardeners, maybe without even knowing it, are using treated article seeds, how does that apply to this?
That does not apply to this. That I think is a more general education effort.
This is really just for
This-
farmers following rats here?
Right, this would be for people using, and we probably, now that you point that out, we probably ought to specify that. So, a homeowner isn't, but yeah, you're probably right. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
Other questions about the communication section? All right.
And storage is return insecticide treated article seeds that are spilled during loading to the original seed lot container, and store insecticide treated article seeds away from food and feed stuff and secure them to prevent unauthorized access. And then the last section is disposal. Dispose of the seed bag label, and excuse me, dispose of the unused seed in accordance with the seed bag label, local requirements, or by returning to the manufacturer. And then some specific things not to do: do not recycle an insecticide treated article seed container, do not compost any insecticide treated article seed, burn or otherwise incinerate insecticide treated article seed inside a stove or residence in an outbuilding, or use treated seed for fuel or ethanol production purposes. So, well, no, so the reason for that being there, that's actually a national thing that because there have been cases, whether a couple of cases in the Midwest where unused treated seed was provided to ethanol plants to create fuel, and they ended up with a big mess, shooting on site kind of stuff. So, yeah, it's a
Representative O'Brien.
Just quickly, are treated article seeds considered hazmats?
No, they would not be considered hazmat because they're not, they don't meet the definition of a hazardous waste, the particular definition of hazardous waste. Now, whether a landfill will accept them, that's a different question. I mean, the best way to handle these seeds is to plant them. That's pretty much what you have to do. Plant them or return them to the manufacturer. So,
But if I got, moldy corn seed or left them out in the rain or something, then there'll be BMPs for how to dispose of those.
Well, the BMP, well, you'll have to, you dispose them as a solid waste if the landfill would take them. Or plant them anyway, you know, they just decay in the soil, you know. Okay, and let's see, then section 4, affordability, and section 5, effective date. So.
I'm certain whether we get through it all there. Are seeds typically, the kinds of seeds that we're talking about for agricultural use, do they have a shelf life that, like the seeds we would buy for planting in our gardens,
Yes.
need to be used in a year?
Yeah, what happens, my understanding, if a seed is not planted in the year it's intended to be, it could still, the viability will decline. So they're typically, they guarantee a 90% germination rate. So it can be taken back by the manufacturer and they will, retest the germination, or if the germination sign up, then they can sell it somewhere else. But yeah, that is, you can't, yeah. So.
Right. There aren't any other questions, Representative.
So at the very beginning of the presentation, you mentioned that these aren't rules and that they could enter a rulemaking process. Wondering two things: what would the timeline actually look like, and what triggers that process?
A little bit undefined at this point, I think. I think what my recommendation to the secretary will be is to wait until the legislation is finalized, because there has been language added. And then we would go back to the AIB and say, additional stuff we have to do, and basically start the process over. It's not a fast process.
As you said.
Yeah, I mean, because then we have to go through the various committees. When we revised this rule, the Vermont rule for the control of pesticides, we had 5 meetings with LCAR. So it took 5, which took like 6 months or 7 months, just that part of it. That was after public notice and comment and everything. So.
Representative Graham.
So I missed the first part.
Right.
You might have covered this, but do you know if sweet corn seeds are?
A good number of them are, yes. Yeah. They're treated.
That did come up, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. Good job.
Bigger things like potatoes, would they?
Not to my knowledge, because they're not seeds, they're pieces.
Right, yeah.
All right, well, we should probably let you get back across the street. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
And glad to answer any questions as they arise.
Okay.